person A, of course, is having a stress response and looks something like this. And the brain is sensing the impending danger of being 15 minutes late for that appointment. And so, as it does that, it immediately sends a message down to the adrenaline glands, pumps adrenaline through the system, just like that. The heart beats faster, the breathing quickens, the palms get sweaty, the muscles tense up. And person A is actually having a response that scientists believe we were supposed to have when we encountered saber-toothed tigers in the wilderness. Now, plug into the thought process or the dialogue of person B, if you could, and you hear something like this. Well, I didn't know this was going to happen to me. I didn't create this traffic. I certainly don't have the power to control it. I think I'll roll down my sunroof, loosen my tie, put on my shades, and work on my pan. And person B looks something like this. Now, what is the difference between person A and person B? Is it circumstance? No, it's just thought, right? The only difference between these two people is what's going on inside of here. That's the difference between A and B. This is the basic ABCs of life. A in life is the activating event. This is the event in your life that you will say is ticking you off or upsetting you, somehow controlling your mood, making you mad. So there's this guy in your notes and he's pointing at someone saying, "You're making me mad." And you see the problem with this man is he actually lacks some emotional intelligence. Because part of emotional intelligence is your ability to regulate your own emotions and to understand that my emotions and the regulation of my emotions is not entirely dependent on my circumstances. It has to do with stuff I can control as well. And so he's blaming the activating event on C, his consequential mood and behaviors. And so what is happening here is he's suggesting that A causes C without realizing there's always something in between A and C, which is B, your belief or your attitude about that activating event. And it's more accurate to say that what I believe or what I think about that event is influencing the way I feel and not the event itself. Somebody has said that life is 90% how you think about what happens to you and only 10% what really happens to you. Do you believe that? What's important is not what happens to you, but what happens in you. Now don't take it too far, because if one of you comes up here and hits me over the head with a baseball bat, I'm not going to say, you know, it's my thinking about that bat that makes me feel the way I feel right now, and not the bat. I'm going to blame it on the black bat, and I'm going to have a good reason to do that. But what I suggest is most of life isn't like that. And most of life we can manage well, and we can manage our emotions well by looking at our belief system, our thought process, our attitude, and asking ourselves the question, how do I really think about this situation? And how is it impacting? How is it influencing how I feel? The second reason why I believe attitude is so important is that attitude attitude is contagious. Attitude is contagious. This is the projection principle. The projection principle goes more like this. The attitude that I project will often get reflected back to me in both the attitude and the performance of others. Have you just noticed this? That when you're positive and when you're optimistic and you're upbeat and you project that, you tend to get it back from other people. But the same can be true in the other direction. How do we know this is true? You know, they took students at the University of Minnesota and they divided them into two groups and they gave them laboratory rats to work with. And the students in group A were told that they would be working with smart, intelligent rats. The students in group B were told that they would be working with stupid rats. And unknown to the students, they videotaped the whole thing. let's talk about junior high school students. If any of you have seen the movie Dangerous Minds, you'll know it's loosely based on a true story about a student teacher in California who was lied to. They actually told her that she would be working with the smartest, the most intelligent group of students in the school, and in fact they gave her the label group, the delinquents, the underachievers. But she believed the lie, and so she began every single day to go into that classroom and project an attitude of faith and confidence in her 7th and 8th graders. And as she projected that attitude of faith and confidence in those kids, what happened was it got reflected back to her in performance. And so those kids not only had her believing in them, but they began to believe in themselves. And so that translated into their performance. Absolutely a powerful thing about you. You know, you're talking about teamwork and team building. The more positive we can be with one another, the more that will get reflected back to one another. So we have two very important reasons to have a very positive, healthy attitude. Number one, it predicts your success, and number two, it shapes your mood. So if it's so important to be positive, next slide, please. If it's so important to be positive, why would anyone want to be negative? And what I believe is that we don't really want to be negative. It's not that we start out life negative, like this little pessimistic boy. We don't really start life out that way. In fact, most of us are pretty positive and optimistic about events and situations that we enter into. You start a new job, and you have a pretty high sense of expectation about how that job is going to turn out to be like. And so what we do is we create an expectation for ourselves that is a very, very powerful, positive expectation. But then we experience what I call the mismatch effect, and it looks something like this. In life there is expectation, and then there is reality. And often there's a gap between the two. And what I'm suggesting is that many times, even though we're very positive about how we think life is going to turn out, the reality is something different. And this is a pretty good illustration of what it is that tends to chip away at our ability to be positive and optimistic. So I start a new job or a new situation in my job, and I think it's going to be like this. And it turns out to be like this. I moved to a new neighborhood. I think the neighborhood's going to be like this, and it turns out to be like this. I start a new relationship. I think the relationship is going to be like this. And this is disappointment. It chips away. I do quite a bit of premarital counseling. And this isn't true, but it could be true. I could have a couple in front of me, and I could look at that couple, and I could say to the couple, the divorce rate in the United States is 99%. Of course it isn't, but I could say that. What would that couple say? What would they say? They would say, not us, right? We are the 1%. No two people in the entire history of the universe have ever loved each other as much as we do. Because that's the way couples are when they're getting married and they're in that sort of premarital engagement phase. They're very, very excited, very, very optimistic about how they think the event will turn out. And so I applaud that. But what that couple doesn't realize is that their set of expectations is probably higher than the reality. Some of you are laughing. It can just happen 2 months into the marriage. One person looks at us and says, I thought you were going to be neater. It's little things sometimes. But at any rate, what I'm suggesting is that this mismatch effect or disappointment is what ultimately makes it difficult in our attitudes. Let me share with you my favorite story about disappointment. When I was a student in college, I took a course in animal zoology. And this was at Cornell University, so you think that, that's kind of crazy, Karl. Why would you choose to do that? Well, the truth is the professor gave the same exam every single year. It was a multiple choice test. I figured I don't even have to go to the class. We have plenty of the copies story, right? Because that's the mismatch effect. You expect this and you get this. And somehow, sometimes in life, we just have to learn how to use our sense of humor and enjoy life and realize that life doesn't always give us what we think it's going to give us. And maybe the next time you experience